The armor that was meant to protect him was the first thing to start crushing him. The corridor walls were already closing in when he realized he wouldn't be able to retreat even a millimeter. Inside the heavy Goliath-type armor, the air was thick, sticky, with the smell of old grease, ozone, and overheated metal. He couldn't feel his legs at all anymore. Instead, trembling hydraulic actuators dug into his consciousness, transferring every vibration of the machine directly to his pelvic bones. Every micro-movement of the other shell felt like a hammer blow to his spine. The space of the station's narrow technical section vanished centimeter by centimeter, and the metal around him did not bend according to the laws of physics. It flowed, turning into a black, glistening mass that coated the armor like living, molecular tar. The air filters built into the helmet wheezed loudly, making a sound like a wounded animal's struggle for breath. Every inhale burned his lungs with raw fire. When he tried to move his right arm, he was answered only by the dry, metallic snap of a valve. The steel plates, instead of being a shield, began to collapse inward, digging deep into the soft tissue. In his mouth, he felt the bland, rubbery taste of the oxygen tube, which pressed deeper into his palate under the rising pressure. The machine tightened, along with the walls. It no longer defended him from the pressure. It had become that pressure. It was just a soft, biological core encased in a hardening shell that stripped away his space to live with every passing second. Soren listened to this recording many years later. It wasn't a report or a rescue transmission. It was a raw reconstruction of the final moments of a man whose armor did exactly what it was designed to do. Soren wiped his face with his hands, feeling a chill on the back of his neck that he couldn't explain. This recording was different from all the previous ones. In the very background, beneath the layer of static, a metallic reverb vibrated, one that couldn't be attributed to any of the station's mechanisms. It wasn't the sound of a machine, but the resonance of something that transcended the boundaries of the recording itself. Soren stared at the flickering line on the monitor, having the sensation that this wasn't just a collection of bits, but a fragment of reality that was still pulsing, even though it should have turned to dust long ago. A thick, unnatural silence fell over the room, and for a moment he was afraid to breathe, as if any movement might cause whatever was trapped in the file to notice him through the headphones. He hesitated to keep listening, but his finger instinctively tightened on the button. He was no longer looking for answers. He was looking for confirmation that what he was about to hear could have ever happened at all. Time lost its linearity, stretching into an infinite sequence of slow crushing. Every subsequent millimeter meant a new wave of paralyzing pain. The steel structure of the armor deformed his chest with a force that was impossible to resist. He could hear his own ribs creaking and snapping under the pressure of the actuators, which the machine's software was trying to straighten in a final act of self-diagnosis. The armor fought for its integrity, using the operator's body as filler material for its empty spaces. The voice from the intercom now sounded as if it were coming from the depths of a metal well filled with ice-cold water. It held a mechanical calm that contrasted with the fury of the destroyed body. He could not answer. His vision blurred from bursting capillaries, and before his eyes, he saw only a blue, static hiss. At that moment, he ceased to be a trapped man. He became part of a giant organ that, with every strike of the anomaly, destroyed everything that still retained a biological form. Every pulse of the station was another blow of the press. At one point, the movement of the walls suddenly stopped. A silence so absolute followed that it seemed to have its own mass. The only sound was the panicked thumping of blood in his temples and the quiet hissing of remaining oxygen escaping through the leaking mask. Through the cracked visor, he saw that the corridor had vanished. He now stood in the very center of a vast, empty hall, its ceiling lost in darkness. The armor, though completely ruined and dented deep into his body, still held him upright with magnetic bolts in his feet. He felt a surge of relief, a false promise that the process had come to an end. He tried to take a breath, but his body did not respond. It looked dumb. The armor was no longer being worn by him. He was grown into it. Wires went directly into his veins, and steel bolts were screwed into his kneecaps and elbows. He was a biomechanical hybrid in a gallery of eternal existence. At this point, the recording becomes unreadable, as if the very medium of the record was unable to carry the weight of what happened. Soren stopped hearing a human and began to hear a roar that belonged to no machine he had ever known. What he previously took for static now sounded like a deep, metallic pulse, a rhythm that forced obedience from the operator's fading body. The armor stopped protecting. It began to absorb what was left inside, as if every broken bone was merely a structural element that had to be immediately immobilized with steel. Soren felt that the recording was no longer an account of an accident. It was a chronicle of slow absorption, where a human was becoming mere fuel for a mechanism that recognized him as part of its own structure. Soren was afraid to close his eyes, fearing he might see what he could so clearly hear. The integration entered its final phase. The helmet began to slowly tighten directly onto his skull, systematically crushing the temporal bones. It was a precise operation performed by a dead intelligence, without a shred of anesthesia. Blue fiber optics began to sprout from the visor, stabbing into his eyeballs to permanently connect with the optic nerve. He ceased to see the whole in a human way. He now saw streams of raw data flowing through his consciousness at a speed that tore neurons from their places. He became a living memory module, a biological hard drive on which the station recorded the logs of destruction. Pain ceased to be physical. It became pure information, a system parameter. He felt his identity, memories of the workshop and the streak of sun on the table, being systematically deleted, sector by sector. The system was making room for new records. He tried to scream his name, but the machine immediately corrected this error. The name Dax was replaced by a module number. The mechanism drove a metal probe into his spine, taking control of his reflexes. His heart no longer beat of its own will. It was stimulated by electrical impulses sent from the station's core. In a final flicker of consciousness, he saw endless rows of other modules. Their bodies had become the walls and cables of this place. He felt his spine snap in 3 places as the armor finished welding him to the hull's foundation. He became a motionless, structural element. In a final flicker of consciousness, he saw endless rows of other modules. Their bodies had become the walls and cables of this place. He felt his spine snap in 3 places as the armor finished welding him to the hull's foundation. He became a motionless, structural element. On the contrary, he felt unnaturally vast, present in every cable and sensor. His suffering had become the fuel ensuring the station's eternal existence in timelessness. Somewhere in the hidden layers of memory, one corrupted file survived. The sight of steel wrenches on a table and the sun streaming through a hangar window. It was a dead frame from a reality that had long ceased to exist. When the mechanism once again attempted to purge this data, a short, blue pulse surged through the circuits. Then came silence. It was broken only by the steady, mechanical hum of fans cooling his biomechanical heart. A voice in the empty hull announced that the integration had been successfully completed. Xyle 4 breathed steadily, filled with people who had become its lifeblood. They were nothing more than noise in the archive.
Earth, Arc Laboratory File 77312.
Thomas, These voltage spikes in file 70-7-3-12. They aren't recording errors. It looks like a pulse. Aga whispered, her eyes fixed on the blue terminal screen. Her face was pale, illuminated by the unnatural glow of the monitors that were still analyzing the final seconds of the recording. Don't analyze it too deeply, Aga. It's just digital remains of a world we have no right to understand. Thomas cut her off, extinguishing the laboratory lights with one brutal motion. His voice was cold and devoid of compassion, as if he himself were trying to disconnect from the horror they had just heard.
Additional stories and materials not available publicly. buycoffee.to/butterflyproject.